My name is Rachel Monroe, and I'm 38 years old. 3 days ago, if you had asked me about my marriage, I would have smiled politely and said, "We're just going through a phase." Not a crisis, not a betrayal, just a phase. That's the word I used with my friends, with my coworkers, even with myself. A phase is something temporary, something you survive with patience, communication, maybe a quiet weekend away, and a promise to try harder. What I didn't realize was that the phase I was describing was actually the moment when the ground had already disappeared, and I was still pressing the gas, pretending we weren't already falling. My husband, Ethan, and I have been married for 7 years. We live in Madison, Wisconsin, in a quiet neighborhood where people wave when they mow their lawns and complain about winter like it's a shared religion. On the outside, our life looked solid, respectable, boring in the comforting adult way. And maybe that was the problem. Ethan started staying out later. At first, it made sense. Work stuff, he said. Networking dinners, team drinks, clients in town. I didn't question it. I didn't want to be that wife. Then his phone started living face down on every surface: the kitchen counter, the coffee table, our nightstand. If I asked a simple question, "What time will you be home?" his shoulders would tense like I had accused him of something. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself stress does strange things to people. Still, night after night, I went to bed alone. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle, trying to convince myself that loneliness didn't count if you were technically married. I kept thinking, this is what adulthood looks like. This is normal. But something inside me knew better. Before I go any further, let me pause for a second. If you've ever told yourself, "I'm probably overthinking this," while your gut was screaming the opposite, I want you to tell me in the comments. You're not alone, even if it felt that way at the time. And if stories about family betrayal, emotional neglect, and quiet breaking points resonate with you, consider subscribing, because what I discovered next changed everything I thought I knew about loyalty, love, and the kind of betrayal that doesn't leave bruises, but still leaves scars. The night everything cracked wasn't dramatic. No screaming, no shattered dishes. I came home around 7, kicked off my shoes, and made pasta. Nothing fancy, just something warm, something normal. I texted Ethan at 7:20. "Dinner's ready. What time will you be home?" No reply. At 8:45, my phone buzzed. "Out with the team. Don't wait up." That was the fourth night that week. My fingers hovered over the screen before I typed back, "Can we please have dinner together at least once this week?" There was no answer. By the time I turned off the stove, the pasta was overcooked and the kitchen smelled faintly burnt. I packed the food away and sat alone at the table, staring at the empty chair across from me. At 10:30, another message came through. "Stop being so needy." I stared at those words longer than I want to admit. Needy? For wanting to eat with my husband, for wanting him to come home. I called him. He answered over loud music and laughter, irritation sharp in his voice. "What?" I told him I missed him. There was a pause. Then he said it, flat, dismissive, final. "Stop acting like my keeper, Rachel. I'll go where I want, with whoever I want." That was the moment I realized something terrifying. I wasn't afraid of losing him anymore. I was afraid of losing myself by staying. After that night, I told myself we just had a bad moment. One sentence said in frustration, one rough evening layered on top of too many long days. That's what reasonable adults do, right? We smooth things over. We don't panic at the first crack. So I tried to reset. The next morning, I made coffee the way Ethan liked it. 2 sugars, splash of oat milk, even though he hadn't touched the coffee maker in months. I left the mug on the counter with a small note that said, "Hope you have a good day." He didn't mention it when he left. The mug was still there when I got home that evening, cold and untouched. That became the pattern. I started noticing the quiet absences more than the loud ones. The way he nodded without really listening when I talked about my day. The way his eyes drifted toward his phone whenever I spoke longer than a minute. The way he sighed, not loudly, but just enough, whenever I asked a question that required emotional effort. I told myself I was being sensitive. I'd always been the emotional one between us. Ethan was practical, efficient, steady. That was what I loved about him when we met. He made decisions quickly. He didn't spiral. He didn't overanalyze. So when I started feeling invisible, I assumed the problem was me. I stopped asking where he was going, stopped texting to check in, stopped mentioning that the bed felt too big at night. I shrank my needs down to something I thought might be manageable. There were evenings I'd sit on the couch with the TV on, not really watching anything, just waiting for the sound of his key in the door. Midnight would pass, then 1, sometimes 2. When he finally came home, he smelled like bars and cold air, his voice already tired, already distant. "How was your day?" I'd ask, softly. "Fine," he'd say, kicking off his shoes, already halfway to the bedroom. And that was it. I began eating dinner alone more often than not. At first, I made real meals, roasted chicken, vegetables, things that took time. Then pasta, then frozen meals eaten straight from the container. Eventually, sometimes I didn't bother at all. I remember one night standing in the grocery store, staring at 2 carts, one filled with food for a family, one with just enough for one person. I chose the smaller one and felt a wave of guilt crash over me, like I was admitting something out loud I wasn't ready to say. Friends asked how Ethan was doing. "He's busy," I'd say. "He's under a lot of pressure. He's just tired." I defended him so often that it became automatic. I defended him even when no one was attacking, especially then. What I didn't say was that I felt lonely in a marriage I was still trying to save by myself. At night, I replayed conversations in my head, wondering where I'd gone wrong. Maybe I talked too much, maybe I didn't give him enough space, maybe I wasn't exciting anymore. We'd fallen into routines, the same grocery list, the same streets, the same weekends. Maybe that was my fault. I remembered how, years ago, he used to reach for my hand without thinking, how he used to ask my opinion on everything, even small things that didn't matter. Somewhere along the way, I had gone from partner to background noise. And the hardest part wasn't the anger, it was the grief. Grief for the version of us that laughed easily. Grief for the woman I was when I believed love was something you both actively chose every day. Grief for the future I kept postponing conversations about because I didn't want to rock the boat. I started sleeping closer to the edge of the bed, subconsciously making room for someone who wasn't there. Some nights I'd wake up and forget for a half second that I was alone. The realization always hit the same way, a quiet, hollow drop in my chest. Still, I stayed, because leaving felt like admitting failure, because staying felt like loyalty, because I kept believing that if I just held on a little longer, the man I married would come back. What I didn't know then was that something far more damaging than distance was already taking root, and it was about to turn my sadness into something much sharper. Anger didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, disguising itself as irritation, as impatience, as a tight feeling in my chest I kept telling myself would pass if I just breathed through it. The first time I really felt it was on a Thursday night. Ethan had promised he'd be home by 9. He said it casually, like it was an afterthought, but I held on to it anyway. I worked late, picked up takeout on the way home, and actually set the table. 2 plates, 2 forks, a ridiculous, hopeful candle I hadn't lit in months. 9 o'clock came and went. At 9:30, I texted him, "Everything okay?" No response. At 10:15, I tried calling. It rang until voicemail. By the time the food was cold and the candle had burned halfway down, my sadness had hardened into something sharper, something that felt like I was being played. He finally walked in just after 11, smelling like whiskey and cold air, jacket half unzipped, eyes already defensive. "You said you'd be home," I said. I wasn't yelling, I wasn't crying, I was calm in that dangerous way that comes right before a storm. "I got caught up," he replied, dropping his keys on the counter. "Why are you making this a thing?" That question, "Why are you making this a thing?" lit something inside me. "I'm not making it a thing," I said, my voice tight. "You said you'd be home. I waited. That's it." He scoffed, rubbing his face like I was exhausting him. God, Rachel, and you're acting like I have to check in with you every second. I'm asking for basic consideration, I said. I'm your wife. That's when his expression changed. Not anger, dismissal. Stop acting like my keeper, he said flatly. I don't need permission to live my life. The words hit me harder than any insult he'd thrown before. Keeper. Like I was controlling him, like I was holding him back, like wanting honesty and presence was some kind of leash. Something in me snapped, not loudly, not dramatically, but cleanly. I'm not trying to control you, I said. I'm trying to feel like I matter. He laughed, actually laughed. You're being too much, he said. Everything with you turns into this emotional interrogation. It's exhausting. Too much. I stood there, staring at him, realizing how upside down the world had become. I had reduced my needs to the bare minimum, a meal together, a conversation, a promise kept, and even that was apparently asking too much. So what do you want me to do? I asked quietly. Care less? Pretend I don't notice when you disappear? He shrugged. I want space. I want you to stop hovering. Hovering. I thought about the nights I'd fallen asleep alone, the meals eaten cold, the texts left unanswered, the way I'd rearranged my entire emotional life to make room for his absence. And suddenly, my sadness turned into fury. Not the screaming kind, the clarifying kind. You don't get to treat me like an inconvenience and call it independence. You don't get to enjoy the benefits of a marriage and reject the responsibilities. He rolled his eyes. You're overreacting. That word, overreacting, landed like gasoline on a fire. I wasn't overreacting. I was reacting to being slowly erased. I could see it now, clear as day. Every late night, every deflected question, every moment he chose anyone and anything over coming home. This wasn't stress. This wasn't a phase. This was a pattern, and patterns don't change unless someone forces them to. I felt something settle inside me then, a cold, steady resolve, the kind that doesn't scream or beg, the kind that stops explaining. Do whatever you want, I said evenly. He looked startled, like he'd expected a fight. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done chasing you. I'm done trying to convince you that I deserve basic respect. He muttered something under his breath and walked past me, disappearing into the bedroom. I stayed in the kitchen long after he'd gone, my hands braced against the counter, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with anger that finally felt justified. For the first time in months, I wasn't wondering what I'd done wrong. I was wondering why I'd tolerated being treated this way for so long, and that question was about to change everything. Anger burns hot, but it doesn't last. What comes after is worse. Silence. That night, Ethan went to bed without another word. No apology, no explanation, just the quiet thud of the bedroom door closing, like punctuation at the end of a sentence I hadn't agreed to finish. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the counter, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of the shower turning on. The house felt unfamiliar, like I was a guest in a place that used to belong to me. When I finally walked into the bedroom, he was already asleep, fully clothed, back turned, phone charging on the nightstand, screen face down. I stood there for a long moment, looking at the man I married, trying to remember when his presence stopped feeling like home. I didn't wake him. I took a pillow and a blanket and walked into the living room instead. The couch was too short, the cushions too thin. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the past year in brutal clarity. Every moment I'd ignored, every excuse I'd made, every time I'd told myself, this is just what marriage looks like sometimes. Around 3 a.m., I felt the weight of it all settle fully on my chest. This wasn't something I could fix by being more patient. This was something that had already broken. The next morning, I moved through the house on autopilot. Shower, coffee, work emails. I didn't see Ethan before I left, and part of me was relieved. I didn't have the energy to pretend everything was fine. At work, I stared at my screen and absorbed nothing. Numbers blurred together. Words lost meaning. I smiled when spoken to and nodded in the right places, but inside, I felt hollowed out. That afternoon, I came home early and sat alone in the quiet house. No TV, no music, just me and the truth I'd been avoiding. I wasn't just lonely. I was grieving a marriage that still technically existed. That realization hurt more than the anger ever had. When Ethan came home that night, he barely looked at me. He grabbed a drink from the fridge, leaned against the counter, and scrolled through his phone like I wasn't there. "I'm sleeping on the couch," I said softly. He shrugged without looking up. "Do what you want." Those 4 words landed heavier than anything else he'd said. Do what you want. As if my presence, my pain, my decision didn't matter either way. I walked away before he could see my face crumble. That night on the couch, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't plan. I just felt tired. Tired of guessing, tired of waiting, tired of shrinking. It dawned on me then, painfully clearly, that I had spent months protecting someone who was actively dismantling me. I had been loyal to a version of Ethan that no longer existed, clinging to memories while ignoring reality. And reality was simple. I was alone in this marriage. The thought terrified me, not because I didn't know how to survive alone, but because I realized I already was. In the quiet of that dark living room, something inside me finally gave way. Not my strength, but my denial. I didn't know yet what I was going to do. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have answers. All I knew was this: I couldn't keep sacrificing myself just to keep a relationship alive on paper. And that realization, as devastating as it was, marked the lowest point, the bottom, the place where pretending stops and clarity begins. Hitting the bottom didn't come with fireworks. There was no dramatic decision, no sudden burst of confidence, just a quiet morning where I woke up on the couch and realized something simple and unsettling. No one was coming to save me. That truth didn't crush me the way I expected. Instead, it steadied me. I went to work that day with a strange calm, the kind that comes when you stop asking why and start asking what now. I answered emails, returned calls, did my job well, the way I always had. But for the first time in months, I wasn't doing it on autopilot. I was present. Later that afternoon, Ethan's mother, Carol, called me. We'd always had a cordial relationship, polite, respectful, never especially close. Her voice sounded tight, controlled. "Rachel," she said, "I was hoping you might have a moment." She explained that the family business, a mid-sized logistics company Ethan's parents had built over 30 years, was dealing with a serious financial issue, a vendor contract, escalating costs, legal language no one fully understood. They'd had a consultant look at it, but something didn't sit right. "I remembered you worked in financial compliance before," she said carefully. "Would you mind taking a look?" For a moment, I almost said no, not because I couldn't help, but because I'd spent so long shrinking myself inside my own marriage that the idea of stepping into competence again felt unfamiliar. Then I thought about the woman who had been eating dinner alone, apologizing for wanting connection, and I said yes. That evening, I sat at my desk with the contract spread out in front of me, page after page of dense language, quiet traps buried beneath polite phrasing, clauses that allowed unilateral fee increases, renewal terms designed to lock clients in indefinitely. The old part of my brain clicked on, sharp, focused, alive. I marked pages, took notes, ran numbers, cross-referenced similar contracts I'd worked with years earlier. By midnight, I had a clear picture. This wasn't just bad business, it was predatory. The next morning, I met Ethan's parents at their office, a modest building, no glass walls or sleek branding, just decades of work humming quietly in the background. As I walked them through the contract, I watched their faces change, confusion giving way to concern, then to something close to fear. This could cost us hundreds of thousands over the next few years, possibly more. Silence filled the room. "What do we do?" his father asked. "For starters," I said, "you stop signing anything. Then you renegotiate, and if they won't budge, you walk." I laid out alternatives, options, a path forward. When I finished, Ethan's mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "We had no idea," she said softly. "Thank you." In that moment, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just someone's wife. I was someone who knew things, someone who could protect, decide, act. They insisted on paying me. I tried to refuse. They wouldn't hear it. "This is real work," his father said, "and you're good at it." When I left their office, the air felt lighter. The sky looked wider. I sat in my car for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, breathing in a version of myself I'd almost forgotten. Ethan noticed the change before I said a word. That night, he asked how my day was. Really asked. When I told him I'd met with his parents, his brows furrowed. "For what?" he asked. "Their vendor contract. It's a mess. I'm helping them fix it." Something flickered across his face. Surprise? Discomfort? Maybe something else. "Oh," he said. "They didn't mention it." "You haven't asked about my work in months," I said evenly. He didn't argue. Over the next week, I spent evenings drafting revisions, preparing negotiation points, outlining risks and protections. Ethan's parents called daily, asking questions, grateful, engaged. And slowly, quietly, the balance in my marriage began to tilt. Ethan started coming home earlier, not dramatically earlier, but noticeably so. He lingered in the kitchen, asked questions, watched me work like he was seeing me clearly for the first time in years. It wasn't romantic. It was something better. Recognition. For the first time since everything started falling apart, I felt hope. Not the desperate kind that clings to denial, but the grounded kind that grows from self-respect. I didn't know yet where my marriage would land, but I knew something important. Whatever happened next, I wasn't going to disappear again. The truth didn't explode into my life. It revealed itself calmly, almost politely, the way real betrayals often do. 2 weeks after I began working closely with Ethan's parents, his mother called me again. This time, her voice was lighter, more confident. "We're meeting with a new consulting firm tomorrow," she said. "They came highly recommended. Would you mind sitting in?" I agreed without hesitation. By then, I was deeply invested, not just professionally, but personally. I wanted to make sure the business was protected. I wanted to see this through. The meeting was scheduled for late afternoon. I arrived early, dressed simply but sharply, my notes organized, my mind clear. I felt steady in a way I hadn't in a long time. Then the door opened, and my stomach dropped. The consultant who walked in wasn't a stranger. She was a woman in her mid-30s, confident, polished, wearing the kind of smile that knew how to command a room. She froze for just a fraction of a second when she saw me, long enough for recognition to flicker across her face before professionalism snapped back into place. Her name was Lena, the same name I'd seen flash across Ethan's phone more times than I could count. The co-worker he rarely mentioned, the one he always dismissed with a shrug. "Rachel," she said carefully, "nice to finally meet you." Finally. Something inside me went cold and very still. The meeting proceeded as if nothing were wrong. Lena presented well, smart analysis, clean projections, confident recommendations. She was good, I'll give her that. But I listened differently now. I noticed the subtle glances, the way she chose her words when addressing Ethan's parents, the slight tension in her shoulders whenever I spoke. When I raised concerns about legal exposure and contract liability, she didn't argue, she deferred. "As long as Rachel is advising you, you're in excellent hands." When the meeting ended, Ethan's parents stepped out to take a call. Lena lingered. "Can we talk for a moment?" she asked quietly. I nodded. We stepped into the hallway, the hum of the office fading behind us. "I want to be clear," she said immediately. "Nothing physical ever happened between Ethan and me." I held her gaze. "That wasn't my question." She swallowed. "He talked to me about feeling stuck, about being unhappy, about you." There it was. The betrayal wasn't in a bed. It was in the space where honesty should have lived. "How long?" I asked. "Months," she admitted. "I told him he needed to talk to you, that this wasn't appropriate." "But he didn't," I said flatly. "No," she said softly. "He didn't." When I walked back into the conference room, Ethan's parents knew immediately. They didn't ask, they didn't need to. That evening, I texted Ethan, "We need to talk. Meet me at your parents' office." He replied almost instantly, "Is everything okay?" "No," I typed back, "but it's time." When he arrived, he looked nervous. His parents were already seated. I stood. "Sit," I said. He did. "I met Lena today," I began calmly. His face drained of color. "She told me everything. Not about cheating, about confiding, about choosing her as an emotional outlet instead of your wife." Silence pressed in on the room. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," he said hoarsely. "I felt small, Rachel. You were thriving. My parents trusted you. I didn't know where I fit anymore." "That does not excuse betrayal," his father snapped. I raised a hand. "This isn't about punishment. It's about consequences." I looked directly at Ethan. "You don't get to outsource intimacy and call it stress. You don't get to make me feel needy for wanting honesty while building a separate emotional life behind my back." Tears filled his eyes. "I didn't cheat." "No," I said, "but you crossed a line and you hit it." That was the price. Not public humiliation, not screaming, exposure, the kind that strips away excuses and leaves only truth. "I'm not competing with your past, and I'm not shrinking myself to make you feel secure." His mother wiped her eyes. His father looked away. "If we're going to move forward, it will be with transparency, with boundaries, and with respect." He nodded, broken. For the first time, I wasn't asking, I was deciding. And that, more than anything, felt like justice. 3 months later, my life looks quieter from the outside. Ethan and I are still together, not because everything magically fixed itself, but because we stopped lying to each other and to ourselves. We go to counseling. We have hard conversations. He no longer hides his phone. He no longer disappears. And when he feels small, he says it out loud instead of turning it into distance. It isn't perfect, but it's honest. I moved my work into a small loft downtown. Nothing fancy, just enough space to think clearly. Contracts and notes spread across my desk, a calendar that finally feels full in the right way. His parents retained me as a consultant. They trust me. They listen. They value what I bring to the table. That still surprises me sometimes, not because I don't deserve it, but because I spent so long forgetting that I did. Some nights, when the house is quiet, I think about how close I came to losing myself entirely, how easy it was to confuse endurance with love, to mistake silence for peace, to believe that shrinking was the price of staying married. I don't blame Ethan for feeling lost, but I also don't excuse the way he chose to cope with it. Family betrayal doesn't always come with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it shows up as emotional shortcuts, as confiding in the wrong person, as choosing comfort over courage, as leaving your partner alone while still technically standing beside them. The hardest truth I learned wasn't about him. It was about me. I learned that love without boundaries becomes erosion, that loyalty without self-respect turns into disappearance, and that staying silent doesn't make you noble, it just makes you invisible. I don't know what the future holds for my marriage. I'm no longer afraid to admit that. What I do know is this: I will never again dim myself to make someone else feel tall. I will never again accept half-truths dressed up as effort, and I will never confuse being chosen with being tolerated. If you've ever found yourself quietly breaking inside a relationship that looked fine from the outside, I see you. If you've ever stayed because leaving felt harder than disappearing, you're not weak, you're human. And if you're standing at a crossroads, wondering whether choosing yourself makes you selfish, let me tell you what I learned the hard way. Sometimes, choosing yourself is the only way to save anything at all. So tell me, would you have stayed, or would you have walked away sooner? I'll be reading your stories.